Sorry I haven't uploaded in a bit. I know that I don't have a crazy huge following that's just waiting for my every video, but I was pretty good there for a while about uploading on either a daily basis or at least every week, and then I just kind of went MIA. New lights. As you can see, I'm rearranging the gym. I cut my squat rack down to a just, I guess, a half rack that's bolted to the wall here. And then I've got my cable crossover machine over there, lat pull machine over there, Smith machine. Got my total gym in this open area that I can set it up where I don't have to move anything. I've got my dumbbells, my whiteboard, my leg developer, and I've also got room for other machines. That's kind of the reason why I started doing this. So I've got some more stuff I've got coming soon, but right now I'm updating the lighting. I tell you, one of the things about these lights is, I don't know if you can see them from your view, but the old lights I have here are just LED bulbs that that point straight down, and I've got these, I guess it's like these lampshades, not lampshades, what would you call it? It's like a black cover that goes over the bulb so it directs all the lights straight down. And that's great for directing light. And if I'm trying to look at my body in the mirror, to like track progress or whatever, see visually, it really helps highlight shadows and contrast. So, it's the bodybuilding lighting, it looks great. But practically for working out in the gym, it sucks. I noticed the big problem that I have is that anytime I have to do incline bench or flat bench or sometimes even like overhead press, depending on where I'm looking, it's not even looking up. Sometimes if I'm on the other side of the gym, but I'm looking across at an angle, I've got this super bright single point of light that's just burning a hole in my vision. So half the time I feel like I need sunglasses in here, which is stupid to wear sunglasses inside at night. But anyway, I'm now updating it by doing these LED strip lights, and I've got these set up just as a test, but I'm gonna go ahead and go around the entire gym. But anyway, gloves. One of the things I wanted to talk about in this video, just as a quick thing, I'm not going to focus on this a bunch, but it's something that kind of needs to be mentioned, and I keep not mentioning it in videos, is basically the importance of, well, the reason why we have different grips, different widths on various exercises. So as an example, let me see, I've got all this stuff set up everywhere. So you'll notice that sometimes when it comes to something like curls, for example, there's a difference between, there's so many different curl varieties, and it's not just a matter of oh, is it wide or narrow? Because that is the thing. If you're using a barbell, you've got wider grip, you've got super narrow grip. Same with the cambered bar. You've got barbell, straight bar, or you have cambered bar. You've got reverse grip curls, you've got hammer curls, you've got incline curls where your arms are kind of pulled back a little bit. You've got preacher curls where your arms are actually forward a little bit. You've got spider curls where your arms are basically perpendicular to your torso when you're curling. You've got what they call show curls, which is actually where you take, let me lower this weight so I can show you. Show curls is literally curling like you're doing a front double bicep, where the arm is out to the side on a cable crossover and you curl it up towards your body. And all these different curl varieties is a good example. It can be confusing, it can be overwhelming for people, and people lose track of why it is that there are these varieties, why they exist, what they are to accomplish, how do you pick which one, how do you set things together? Like if I'm gonna do 3 different versions of curls, how do I know which ones are best to put together? So I'm gonna try and just very briefly touch on this. And again, brief, because you could really get into the weeds, you could really get into the nitty-gritty on whether we're talking about upper body or lower body, which muscle specifically, other things to consider with certain exercises. There's so much nitty-gritty, so I know I'm not going to cover everything, but this is a basic idea. When it comes to curls, for example, if you look at someone's arm, someone's bicep, right? I can't see the screen, so I don't know where I'm at, but if you look at someone's arm, if I curl up with my hand facing up, my bicep pushes out more. my wrist is supinated, so that happens. If I twist around and face my arm down, the bicep elongates because my wrist is no longer supinated. Even without flexing, even without doing a pose, just by simply curling or supinating my wrist back and forth, you can see my bicep moving. That is unique to the bicep. Now, there are some other muscles in the body that somewhat do that, but this is the first example we're going to go with. The bicep will actually change position and change which parts of the bicep are dominantly working based on where your hand is at. Not only that, but you have to remember that there are 2 points. There's the point of origin and the point of insertion when it comes to any muscle. So with the bicep, you've got 2 areas you're thinking of. Up here, actually near where the pec is, it goes up past the shoulder and inserts over here in the shoulder. Matter of fact, a lot of the time when someone swears that their front delt, the front of their shoulder is hurting so bad, man, what's wrong with my shoulder? It's actually a bicep problem. It's very common. But then there's down here, the more commonly thought of area, which is below the elbow on the forearm. And the bicep, everyone thinks about it working here, contracting to lift the arm, which is the primary function. But as a secondary function, the bicep also does assist in bringing the arm across your body. Because again, as it tightens, it's pulling on both anchor points. It's pulling here on the chest to bring your arm across, and it's also contracting and pulling on the forearm. Now, by just without thinking about it subconsciously, by keeping our arms to the side and only trying to move our wrist up, inherently, this is not activated as much up here. But it is a factor, which is part of the reason, this is my theory anyway, I've always theorized that part of the reason why someone who does a lot of bench pressing, power lifters, people like that, if they do a lot of bench press, a lot of compound pressing movements, but they never do curls, most of their bicep development seems a little bit lopsided. You seem to notice that near the top, up here, closer to the shoulder, the bicep is really thick, very, very well developed. But then at the bottom side, closer to the elbow, it always seems flatter and less developed. Now, I actually cannot prove that. I don't know if that's for sure. I've never bothered to look into it too much. I don't even know if they've done studies on that specifically, but it is something I've noticed anecdotally for probably 2 decades. And it's true with me as well. I've never really trained arms. Maybe here or there, hit and miss. I've been training them lately, but that's it. But I was powerlifting for a long time. I've always done a lot of compound pressing movements. And sure enough, when I flex my arm, aside from the fact that I don't have very well developed biceps, I do notice that the top side is actually much thicker and much bigger in every category. And the bottom side is pretty puny. So take that for what it is. But the whole reason why these different exercises exist is to try to, on a subconscious level, take advantage of these different positions. So there are some things that we can control just through mind-muscle connection. We can actively think, I want to use this muscle, not this muscle, and that does help. That's why mind-muscle connection is something that people talk about. But for the vast majority of people, they don't know how to take advantage of something like mind-muscle connection. They don't know how to force a certain muscle to contract. And in some cases, depending on what it is, you actually can't. There's a lot of cases where 2 muscles are so closely related. They are so inherently kind of meant to help each other and assist each other that you can't just mentally choose to turn one on and turn one off. So that's where exercise variety comes in. And I'm going to grab this straight bar that I made for cable stuff as an example. Now, because the supination of the wrist will actually change which part of the bicep muscle, or maybe in the brachius, the brachii, is working. That's one thing to think of. If I have a dumbbell or I have a cable handle or something else, I can actively think, okay, I want to try to keep my pinky up, keep the pinky up, which is basically really super supinate the wrist. Or I'm doing a hammer curl, so my thumb is facing up, or I'm doing a reverse curl, so my knuckles are facing up. That's all valid ways to do things. But also, again, the position of the arm. The arm being faced in across the body this way is going to put a different point of stress on the bicep than the arm flared all the way out and putting stress on the bicep in this direction. Again, one example you can think of just generically is one factor is that with this insertion point here, or I guess the point of origin with the bicep, if my shoulder is rolled in and my arm is coming across, this should be looser naturally. This is not as tight. It can't be. It's closed in. Whereas if I have my arm flared out here, naturally that outer rotation is going to stretch this point of origin and make this tighter, and it's going to change the way the bicep activates. So even without thinking about wrist position, curling in close like this has, without me thinking about it, I don't have to think, oh, my elbows are out, my wrists are in. By having a narrow grip, my elbows naturally have to be outside my body, unless I do this. They naturally have to be outside my body, and because my grip is so narrow, it puts my arm at that kind of inward rotated position without having to explain to somebody that that's what they're doing or why. You just say, do narrow grip curls, and it naturally puts their arms at this kind of inner curl position. Whereas really wide grip curls, if I grab out here, it naturally rotates my arms out in comparison to where my elbows are at, for example. So again, without explaining to somebody exactly how they're supposed to position their body or what they're doing or why or the mechanics of it, you just say, hey, do wide grip curls. And as you can see, the wide grip versus the narrow grip puts my arms and thus my biceps at two different positions. Now that's the first more obvious thing. The thing that's less obvious is exactly what else is happening with those positions. So if I have my hands in like this, I don't know how much you can tell by your point of view, but maybe you can try it at home. Naturally, I cannot supinate my wrist as much. Rotated in, my thumb kind of wants to stay higher. I can try and supinate as hard as I can, and I just can't get my pinky as high as my thumb because of the position of my arm. That's just the mechanics of it. Whereas when I come out here, in order to grab a flat bar that's going straight, in order to actually grab it and have a good grip, inherently my pinky has to stay up. Because if my pinky drops, the first thing that happens is I can't grab the bar all the way. So on a subconscious level, without thinking about it, by keeping a grip of that bar, I'm also keeping my pinky very, very high. And if you think about it, my pinky is naturally higher than my thumb. So this also places an inherent hard, tight supination on the bicep, whereas this inherently is less supinated. So there's the starting position of the curl as far as where your upper arm is, out here or in here, and then also inherently, without thinking about it, how much is it actually able to supinate to change the starting position of the bicep and how it's contracting and everything else. Now, before I go on to the next thing, that's where people get into trouble. This is where exercise selection alone is not enough. I can say I'm going to do wide grip curls as a generic term, but if I'm not actually going through the effort of making sure that I'm legitimately doing a wide grip curl, then I'm not going to get the benefits of a wide grip curl. And what I mean is that there are people, and this is kind of a human condition, if you see on YouTube, Instagram, whatever, in normal gyms, you see this a lot, and people don't think about it. They're not doing it on purpose. They just, again, they don't know why they're doing these things. They hear a name and they do that thing. They think, oh, this must be a normal curl, more or less, because my hands are about shoulder width apart. So if I go in an inch or two, this is narrow grip curl. But as you can see, the position of my arm hasn't really changed much. It's actually a negligible amount. Or they'll go out a little bit and they say, okay, this is wide grip curl. When again, it's been a negligible change. On top of that, something that happens all the time is people don't understand the whole concept, the whole point of the position with the curl, which is that, again, in relation to your elbow, which we're talking about the position of your arm as a whole, the wrist is out here. It's out wider than my elbows, it's wider than my shoulders, it's putting my arm in this starting position. I have to curl in this position specifically. That's the whole point. But what people will do is they will not go wide enough, for one, it's a negligible amount, and then they immediately compensate by flaring the elbows out. So you'll notice it all the time. If they grab here, one, it's not wide enough, but two, instead of keeping the elbows tucked in and against the body and curling up so their hand is still out wider than their elbows and shoulders, they have this negligibly wide grip that's not really a wide grip. And then they let the elbows stay in line. And as they curl, the elbows flare out. And sometimes, again, still ends up being wider than the wrist. So they have this kind of lopsided bicep where they have more strength and more power when their thumb is more up and they can use more of the brake muscle and less of the bicep, and it's not supinated. That's where they have kind of natural strength. They're doing wide grip curls in an effort to increase the peak on their bicep and isolate the bicep specifically. But then when they go to do their wide grip curls, it's negligibly wide. It's not wide enough. They're not keeping their palm flat up against the bar to make sure that the supination is there. And then if all that wasn't bad enough, they flare their elbows out. So their elbows end up still being wider than their wrist, and they end up having this position of their arm. They're curling here rather than out here. But in their mind, well, it's wide grip curls though. But I did wide grip curls. I tried wide grip curls and they never worked for me. They didn't help the peak of my bicep at all. I didn't get any better bicep development when I did wide grip curls. And again, they're not lying. They're not trying to mislead you. They're not even trying to lie to themselves. They just honestly don't understand that they did it wrong. Inherently, their form was bad. They didn't legit go wide enough. They didn't keep their hands supinated by really grabbing the bar. And they didn't keep their elbows tucked in so they could maintain that position of their arm. And it's the same thing with narrow grip curls. The whole point of narrow grip curls usually is to get this angle on your bicep. People will then just lean forward and bring their biceps in. Now this is another variation that is useful, but it's not the same as a standard narrow curl. So if I curl right here, you can see my arm position. The position of my arms and my wrist and my biceps is not the same as curling right here. The angle is different. Now, everything has its place, everything has its benefit. In order to do an exercise, to perform a movement pattern, you have to do something. The weight's not going to lift itself, so it does require effort. But this is the difference between doing something correctly and not doing it correctly. It's like if somebody told you, I'm doing an extreme example here. If somebody said the best thing for biceps was cable bicep extensions, for some reason, they said bicep extensions on a cable machine. And you said, okay, how do I do cable bicep extensions? And they were like, well, I grab this, okay, and I keep my wrist up. I keep my wrist supinated. That way it activates the bicep. And then I'm going to extend my arm. And that's really going to work the bicep. Now, in their mind, they think, yeah, that makes sense. Wrist is up, it's supinated, that's bicep. It's the cable, so it's isolateral. And now just extend. All right, I'm going to do that. And they do that every day or twice a week, whatever it is, for weeks and months and years. And for some mysterious reason that they can't figure out, their triceps are growing, but their biceps just aren't responding. I don't understand it. I'm doing the exercise that's supposed to be the best for my biceps. I guess my genetics are terrible. No. It's because although you are genuinely trying, you're putting in effort, you think you're doing the right thing, this thing that you're doing isn't actually going to train your biceps. It was the wrong exercise selection. But it's no different than when you choose a certain exercise and then you fail to do that exercise the intended way. It's intended to be done a certain way for a reason. Now the opposite end of that is the triceps. With the triceps, differently. Now look at my tricep. Arm is bent, tricep, okay. So right now my thumbs are facing up, and you see how my tricep looks. Now I'm going to face my hand down. How's my tricep look? Face my hand up. How's my tricep look? Ignore the bicep. As I move my hand back and forth, as I supinate the wrist, what's happening to my tricep? Nothing. The tricep is not anchored in the same way that the bicep is. It doesn't perform the same function as the bicep. The tricep is not the same as the bicep. It's not responsible for the same movements as the bicep. The bicep aids in wrist supination. The tricep does not. Therefore, because the tricep is not at all responsible for aiding in wrist supination plays no role in how well you're working the triceps. So with something like all these various tricep movements, the whole reasoning behind the different movements is very different and the effect is very different. And I'll give you an example. Whether I use a cambered bar and my thumbs are facing slightly up, or I flip it around and I go in here, my thumbs are now actually facing slightly down. Or I'm going wider versus going narrower. I'm going to do really wide grip extensions versus really narrow grip extensions. I'm going to use a cambered bar, or maybe I'll use a straight bar, or maybe I'll use ropes instead. None of that is making inherently by itself, none of that's making a difference. Now, it's been old school idea was that if I'm doing, let's say with a handle, I'm doing isolateral, single arm tricep extensions with a handle like this on a cable machine. Now, if I press down like this versus flipping my wrist up and pressing down like this, makes absolutely no difference to the tricep. And that's going to upset a lot of people because that's the dogma. They believe it has to make a difference. It doesn't. The actual wrist position itself, whether it's a standard extension or it's a reverse grip, makes no difference to the tricep. It doesn't know the difference. It doesn't care. The forearm is in the same position in relation to the upper arm. The upper arm is in the same position in relation to the shoulder, in relation to the torso. All of this has remained the same. The position of the wrist doesn't change the tricep at all. The reason why we choose different exercises with the tricep is more specifically related to the angle of the elbow the elbow and the wrist and the shoulder in relation to the torso, because that's the stuff that's going to be a bigger factor in the triceps. When I do, and again, this isn't wide enough to show you a really ridiculous example, but let's say I'm doing bench press, right? If I'm doing a wider grip bench press, because my hands are out so wide, I cannot tuck my elbows in past a certain point. I can try, but what will happen is that the bar will just collapse up at me. In order to support the bar and not have it collapse on my face or throat, I have to keep my elbows more or less in line with my wrist. So even if I'm tucking them, there's a limit to how much I can tuck them. Which means inherently, no matter how wrong I do it, there's a certain angle that's being accomplished. In order to do a certain grip width, it inherently has to place my arms at a certain angle in relation to my body, and thus my elbows at a certain angle in relation to my body, which is going to put a different emphasis on how the tricep and the chest and everything else is being worked. Versus if I go in real narrow grip bench press, if I try to have my elbows flared out, it feels goofy as shit. I can feel my shoulders, my wrist, everything's torquing. Now you can force yourself to do that, but you also notice that a lot of the time, unless you're extremely flexible, your wrist hurt, your shoulders start to hurt. It just feels weird. This is not a natural pushing position for the body. What ends up happening more naturally without thinking about it is that when your wrist gets narrow like this, your grip gets narrow, you inherently keep your elbows tucked into your sides and bring the bar lower down. That's the natural pushing position, or some variation of that. Without thinking of it, everybody's a little bit different. Again, your limb lengths, how long your arms are versus how wide your shoulders are, all these things. But more naturally, again, without thinking about it, this will inherently put your arm at a different angle in relation to your torso, which will again emphasize different muscles in a different way. It'll make some muscles more dominant, some other muscles less dominant. It'll also change how those muscles are working. Because of course, again, the way that my triceps are activating and which part of the tricep is working or how much load is being placed on the tricep as an emphasis is going to be different in a compound movement where it's a perpendicular pressing motion to my body. I'm pressing perpendicular to my body versus if I'm keeping my elbows tucked, my upper arm is never moving out at all, and I'm pressing a cable down, versus if I've got my elbow completely up overhead and I'm extending overhead. Or what if I go in the middle? Instead of pressing out, I'm going to keep my arm out like this the whole time, and I'm going to do like a skull crusher, right? All of these are affecting the starting position of the tricep, the ending position of the tricep, and then how it's getting there, which means, again, where it's at, where it's angled, how much it's being emphasized, which other muscles can or cannot help it. So the reason why I might choose, let's say, I'll use this as an example, compound movement, like a narrow grip bench press. The reason why you might choose a narrow grip press compound movement for your tricep, specifically because the shoulders and the chest can help. No matter how narrow it is, those two muscles are still going to help. Now, it will change the amount that they're helping, but they can help. And it's because they can help and because they can compensate and almost act like a built-in spotter. As the triceps become more fatigued and they can't do the movement by themselves, or they can't take as much of the load because they're getting worn out, the chest will naturally have to take over more. The shoulders will have to take over more. And then eventually you'll reach a point where, because of the position you're in, because of the angles at which you're pressing, your chest simply cannot continue to help. It's not in a mechanically advantageous enough position. Your front delts cannot continue to help that much, and eventually you fail, right? You hit that rep, you can't go through, you're done. But again, it was almost like a built-in spotter. Your triceps were initially the primary mover, and then as they became more and more fatigued, the other muscles, the pecs and the delts, they were taking over until you reached a point of failure, of exhaustion. That was the point. You got to use a heavier total weight in this heavy compound movement and kind of get those built-in assisted reps. You got to really take it to failure. Whereas if I do an isolation movement just for my triceps, the idea is that I don't want my chest to help. I don't want my front delts to help. I'm trying to isolate the triceps. But even once I isolate the triceps, there are a couple of different primary ways we can do it. Pressing down means that, for example, there's no tension on the long head of the tricep. It's not there inherently. Just like the bicep, similar to the bicep, the tricep has 2 points that you have to realize. There's the point everybody thinks about, which is down past the elbow. It anchors on the forearm to extend the arm, but it also goes up past the shoulder and anchors into your scapula. So the tricep actually does, it's not the primary mover, but it does assist in bringing your arm back. That's why sometimes if you're doing, let's say, like cable pullovers, you'll start to notice that the top insertion point of your tricep starts to really burn. It's also why sometimes when you're doing tricep extensions, you'll notice that your lats kind of start to get tight, or your rear delts start to burn a bit, because they, along with your tricep, are all trying to help keep your arms tucked in and not get pulled out in front of you. So it's these little crossover things. Why is it that when I'm doing lat pullovers, sometimes I feel my triceps? Or why is it that when I'm doing tricep extensions, sometimes I can feel it in my rear delts or my lats a little bit? It's because they're helping each other. It's kind of a crossover point. But this position, no pre-stretch, no previous tension on the long head of the tricep, and then extending it straight down, and it's being stabilized, assisted in stabilization anyway, by things like the shoulder and the lats. And as you get closer and closer to failure, you see a lot of people, they actually start to press their shoulders forward. So they actually contract their chest and their delts and turn it into a kind of a decline pressing movement as a bit of assistance. That's very different than something like the overhead extension. With the arm, with the elbow straight overhead as much as you can, you are pre-stretching that long head as much as possible, which actually makes a difference in how much it's being activated and how well it's going to develop. Not only are you pre-stretching that long head as much as possible, but also there's nothing to help stabilize it. It will naturally kind of want to wander, because it's like similar to if I tried to take this and balance it on my hand. Now I can make these little micro adjustments down here at my hand to prevent it from falling over. But if there's a lot of weight up here at the top, That's a huge lever arm. There's only so much I can do at the bottom to help keep it stable. And it's the same with your overhead extensions. Yes, your lat is still attached, your shoulders are still attached, but the halfway point is all the way up here. And when the weight is extended to the top, it's all the way up there. So big weight movements up here, these muscles in your shoulder and back are trying to stabilize, but there's not really much they can do. It's inherently very, very difficult. It's kind of a less stable way. They cannot assist the way they do in a tricep extension where everything's tight and closed in and naturally very stable. On top of that, again, there's the pre-stretch of the long head, and then past that, nothing can help it. Your chest cannot contract to help bring this dumbbell overhead. Your front delts cannot contract anymore, because if they were to contract, it helps push your elbow back behind your head more. They're not going to contract to help bring that overhead. Your lats, your rear delts, nothing can do anything to help your tricep. This forces your tricep and only your tricep to work. It's why it has quite literally been proven through EMG studies to be the most effective tricep exercise as far as just isolating and getting the most activation out of your tricep. So I guess this has kind of been longer than I wanted it to be, but I wanted to make sure I was explaining it clearly. And again, there are so many examples, so many different exercises, so many different muscle groups. But the idea is that this is the kind of stuff you want to know and the stuff you want to think about when you're doing exercise selection. If you're saying that I want to do one arm dumbbell concentration curls, it's good. It's isolateral. It's getting this angle that you need. That's a good idea. And you say, okay, then the next bicep exercise I'm going to do is going to be a wide grip barbell curl. That's also good, because that's bringing you to the exact opposite end of the spectrum. It's changing the supination point. It's changing the angle of the arm. That's the other end of the spectrum. That's a good idea. It's the same if you said I wanted to do incline curls. So the starting point was back here where there's a pre-stretch on that bicep origin. And then the next exercise I'm going to do is going to be preacher curls. So there's no pre-stretch at all on that bicep origin. These are two opposing movements. So those are good ideas to work together. And with triceps, something like, oh, I'm going to do tricep press downs. Angle doesn't matter. I'm just going to do press downs of some type, whatever's most comfortable for you. And then I'm going to do overhead extensions. Those are good. Those are the two opposite ends. They're great to combine together. But when someone says, okay, I'm going to do barbell, straight bar tricep extensions. And then I'm going to do cambered bar tricep extensions. And then I'm going to do one arm tricep extensions. And then I'm going to do reverse grip tricep extensions. And then I'm going to do, so it gets to a point where, oh yeah, the rope, can't forget about the rope. Then I'm going to do rope extensions. And don't forget, one of the sets, I'm going to keep the hands together, and then the other set, I'm going to make sure I flare it out at the bottom. None of that is changing the way that your bicep or your tricep is activating. So if you're rushed for time or you're trying to have a really efficient workout and you say, oh, I got to limit it to 3 tricep exercises, what should I do? Oh, I'll do reverse grip tricep extensions because that reverse grip makes a big difference. And then I'll do rope tricep extensions because the thumbs up, it's kind of like hammer curls, but for the triceps, so that makes a difference. And then I'll do straight bar tricep extensions. That way I have my hand in every angle and I'll get the most tricep development. Tricep doesn't know the difference. So you don't have to be a philosopher with the stuff. You don't have to be an expert on this stuff, but you should at least have a basic understanding of why certain exercises exist. The reason why you might select rope extensions as a way to extend your triceps instead of straight bar extensions might be your wrist. If you notice that trying to do straight bar tricep extensions just puts pain in your wrist, it hurts for one reason, maybe you had surgery, maybe you have lack of flexibility, arthritis, whatever it is. If trying to do tricep extensions with a straight bar hurts your wrist, then do a cambered bar. Take emphasis off the wrist. Your tricep is going to have the exact same activation. It's not going to make a difference. Or if the rope is the only thing available and you want to use the rope, fine. And if you get to the bottom of the rope and your hands are still straight versus doing that thing with the wrist, it doesn't really make a difference. So if somebody's doing it like this versus they're doing it like that, they're still activating the tricep either way. It's the same overall movement pattern. So that's the basic idea, is just like I explained in the video where I talked about, let's say, dumbbell flies versus cable crossovers, why you might want to choose one over the other. When it comes to any movement, in this case, let's say arms, there's a reason why certain exercises exist, but just because 100 different exercises exist don't mean that they're all unique, individual, special things that all need to be implemented. Really, at the end of the day, you're just trying to accomplish just a few basic movement patterns. And based on your individual preferences or what's available to you or what you think feels better, you have a very large variety of exercises that, although they look a bit different, they all accomplish the same thing. So you choose what's best for you in your situation, your position. But anyway, I hope that was helpful. And I don't know, guess talk to you later. Bye.